Welcome to the nature of the curriculum, how the education system can change the future. Thank you all for coming along this morning. It's great to see so many people, and from the sign-up lists that I've been looking at, so many different backgrounds and interests. It's really great to have so many different people represented here. My name's Erica Fudge, and I teach in the School of Humanities at the University of Strathclyde here in Glasgow, where, of course, COP26 is happening right now, about 1.5 miles that way from where I'm sitting at the moment. This session has emerged out of a number of conversations I've been having with students, colleagues, friends about what it is that we are doing, can be doing, should be doing in our roles as educators, offer young people ways forward that are more attuned to the world we live in. How we live in the world is, of course, linked to how we have learnt to think about the world. And by that, I don't just mean how we understand the details, the questions about biodiversity, evolution, habitat loss, and so on, although those are crucial. I also mean learn to think about a world in that more invisible way, in the way that we learn to assume things to the extent that we don't think we are assuming anything. We think it's just how things are. It is a strange paradox in our use of the word nature in English that you might say we have all been naturalized into certain ways of living that have turned out to be destroying the natural world. In fact, that conception of the natural world as out there, separate from us, so central to Western thinking, is itself at the core, perhaps, of the issues we're facing today. We need to find ways of placing ourselves within the environment. We need to recognize that the potential we have as a species, and especially those Homo sapiens in the global north, of course, to abuse, instrumentalize, dominate. We are, as my nephew's Top Trumps Predators game told me, the most destructive species on the planet. But we are also capable of being something different from that. How do we get to that different way of being? That surely is where the education system comes in. The American philosopher Donna Haraway gives us a prompt. She reminds us that, and this is a quote, "It matters what thoughts think thoughts," unquote. That is, we need to pay attention not only to our ideas, but how our ideas came to be. We need to invite children from the earliest stages of their education right through to the end to think about who they are, what they are, how they are, in all kinds of new ways. We need to support the futures of young people by making clear that there are ways forward, there are other ways of being in the world that need not be destructive. We need, in Donna Haraway's words again, to destabilize worlds of thinking with other worlds of thinking. Increasing understanding of the world we live in on a local and a global scale through observation, experiment, scientific understanding is vital. But so too is the work of the imagination. How we imagine, how we think our thoughts plays a crucial role in how we understand and engage with our environments. How we go about embedding this in the education system, and so making our entanglement with the world rather than our dominance over it second nature, needs contributions from across disciplines. Charles Darwin, I think, knew this. At the end of On the Origin of Species, he asks the reader to remember that at the core of the new theory that he's proposing is an experience of something that is far from objective, that is pleasure at a recognition of the power of the world of plants, animals, land, air, intertwining and coexisting. And I'm going to read an edited version of this final paragraph of what has been recognized as one of the most important books ever written, a book which places humans as just one among many evolving beings on the planet. So this is from the final paragraph of On the Origin of Species. It is interesting to contemplate an entangled bank, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about and with worms crawling through the damp earth. and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent on each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that while this planet has gone cycling on according to fixed laws of gravity, so from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. In a world that seems bleak, so that's the end of the quotation. In a world that seems bleak and a future uncertain, perhaps making more room for this mixture of observation, understanding, and wonder might offer not only moments of pleasure in the classroom, but also a possible way of imagining a better future for everyone and everything. So this event has the perspective of a range of different stakeholders: a campaigner, 2 representatives of the SQA, that's the Scottish Qualifications Authority, a school teacher, a PhD student, a poet, and a member of the Scottish Parliament. We've given minimal direction to everyone, just asked them to come and speak for about 5 minutes. There are 2 colleagues from the SQA, so they've got a bit longer. Talk for about 5 minutes about their ideas, about the relationship between or the role of education in the natural world. After they've all had their say, we will open things up and we hope you will join in. You can see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat link. Please feel free to send questions to everyone during the session as and when a question comes to you. Your questions can be aimed at individual speakers or addressed to all our participants. I've asked Rebecca Jones, a PhD student here at Strathclyde, to oversee and read out the questions towards the end of the session. And we hope to have a good amount of time to go through them. So that's me. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I have great pleasure in introducing Mary Colwell. Mary is an award-winning author, producer, and campaigner for nature. Her articles have appeared in The Guardian, BBC Wildlife Magazine, The Tablet, Country Life, and many other publications. She's made documentaries for the BBC Natural History Unit in both TV and radio, and has published 3 books: John Muir, The Scotsman Who Saved America's Wild Places, Curlew Moon, and most recently Beak, Tooth and Claw, which was published by William Collins in April 2021. In 2009, she won a Sony Radio Academy Gold Award, and in October 2017, she was awarded the Dilys Breeze Medal by the British Trust for Ornithology for outstanding science communication. In 2018, the David Bellamy Award from the Gamekeepers Association for her conservation work on curlews, and in 2019, the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust Marsh Award for conservation. She's spearheading the establishment of a GCSE in natural history in England, and in March 2021, she was appointed chair of the government-supported Curlew Recovery Partnership England, a roundtable of organisations charged with restoring curlews, their habitats, and associated wildlife across England. In 2020, she set up the charity Curlew Action. Mary, thank you for coming. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. And I'm delighted that you've come along to this session. So just a little bit of background about me. As Erica said, I'm basically a campaigner, a producer, and an author. And I specialise in communicating about the environment and the natural world. And over the years, the statistics that were coming out about our relationship with nature were becoming more and more worrying. I remember very vividly at the BBC Natural History Unit trying to find a recording of the Dawn Chorus. And I was going through some of the sound archives and I picked up the sound of the Dawn Chorus in the 1960s. And I played that and it was so astonishing. It was one of those moments where you just stopped in your tracks because I didn't recognise it. I didn't recognise this Dawn Chorus because it was literally dominated by the sound of a purring noise. Rhythmic purring. It's like a thousand cats out in the countryside. But of course, it's not a cat, it's the turtle dove. And the turtle dove has now disappeared. 99% of its range has gone in England. And so that Dawn Chorus doesn't actually mean anything anymore. But unless you know what a turtle dove is and you know what it sounds like, you won't notice that disappearance. You won't notice that the sort of seat, the seat on next to you on the bus is now empty. You don't know its name. You don't understand what's gone. And then the statistics start coming out. 50% of young people today can't identify a nettle. 80% a bumblebee, 90% one of the large white butterflies. They're just things out there for so many of our young people. The natural world is just populated by things, not something with a name that you have a relationship with, that you care about, that you understand, that has needs and wants and has relationships of their own. And that richness, that natural world full of characters that live out there in their own world, their own lives, and those lives interact with us, is something now it's like we walk amongst strangers. We don't know anybody's name anymore. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they are. That to me is an absolute tragedy. It's a tragedy for those creatures because we don't know when they disappear. And it's a tragedy for us personally because the natural world is the source of so much inspiration, so much joy, so much insight, so much wisdom, so much wonder, as well as being a source of all the things we need to survive. And so a combination of all these things began to build up. When one of my favorite birds, the curlew, started to disappear, in some areas, say like Southern Ireland, by 97%, and no one really seemed to sort of comment on it. It was a tremendous concern to me because the natural world is thinning out right underneath our noses. And it's as though that relationship is so broken, we don't notice, or we don't know what to do about it. And so that's why I started to campaign for a GCSE and the England qualification, a GCSE in natural history, to start to repair that broken relationship so that the next generation know what they're living with, know what those things are, know what they need, how our local wildlife relates to a broader wildlife and nationally, and how nationally we relate to Europe and beyond into the big wide world. And so that's really important that we know what we live with and how that relates. But it's also important because by having that relationship, we start to begin to nurture again that inspiration from nature. And that's what makes us truly human. So I began this campaign. It's been going for 10 years now. And eventually sputtered and stopped and started, but I didn't really know how to do it. And I put out a campaign on the government.gov petitions that you can put. You can start a petition on anything. And if you get over 10,000 signatures, you get a response back from the government. If you get 100,000 signatures, you get a debate in Parliament. But I didn't get 100,000 because the petition was pulled after 2 weeks. I only got 10,000, but it was enough to get a response. And the government just said, well, no, it's okay. We're doing it anyway. We name a few trees in the O-level biology, natural histories, tick the box. We don't need anything else. And that so blatantly isn't true, because if environmental education was working, we wouldn't be in this mess. Let me say that again. If environmental education was working, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. And so I started the petition again. I tried to get some interest. And then Caroline Lucas, the Green MP down in Brighton, got in touch saying, how can I help? And she spearheaded it into the corridors of power, and which got me in touch with an exam board, an English exam board. But why stop at England? Why not have a qualification in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales and right across Europe and right across the world, where we put nature and our relationship with the natural world right back into the very heart of education, so that every child has access to that joy and wonder and that vital information. Only then can you start to build up and develop the knowledge base that you need to make the right decisions for the future. If you don't know what a butterfly is, you won't know what food plants it needs, and you won't know what environments you need to make that happen. If we lose our pollinators, we don't just lose butterflies, we lose us as well. Everything is interrelated. And this way of just splitting things out, as Erica was so beautifully putting earlier and quoting from Darwin, this is not just about naming things and facts and figures. It's about relationship. It's about everything else. So to see us as part of a big web of life, and how that web of life is sustained is fundamental to who we are as humans. So I'll leave you with a quote from an education psychologist, and who said that the future will belong to the nature smart, those individuals and families and businesses and political leaders who develop a deeper understanding of the transformative power of the natural world, and who balance the virtual with the real. The more high-tech we become, the more nature we need. That's why we need a qualification in natural history. That's why we need to put nature back into education. And I hope that this meeting that Erica so wonderfully organised will be a stepping stone to do that in Scotland. And I'm standing by ready to help in whatever way I can. So thank you, Erica, for the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you for coming, Mary. I'm sorry that you weren't able to come in person. It would have been lovely to see you up here, but one day we will get you into Scotland. Thank you so much, Mary. So we move to our next speakers. We'll take all the questions at the end of the talks. Our next two speakers are Donna Clark and Sue Pope. Donna Clark is a former lecturer and programme leader at University of Highlands and Islands, and was involved in the teaching of environment-focused courses at both college and university level for many years. She's been Scottish Qualifications Authority's Subject Implementation Manager for Environmental Science since 2016, which involves supporting teachers and lecturers to understand the requirements of the environmental science courses and the standards to apply across assessment, providing centres with advice and guidance related to the teaching and learning on national courses, and facilitating networking between teachers and lecturers. Within SQA, Donna advises qualification development teams on the embedding of learning for sustainability into SQA courses. She also responds to environment-related queries received by SQA. Donna is the principal assessor for higher environmental science, leading the team that prepares the end-of-year exam papers. Outside work, Donna is a beekeeper, a hobby that requires keen observation of nature in general and the interactions that affect it, both natural and anthropogenic. Sue Pope is Head of Service, Science, Mathematics and Core Skills at the Scottish Qualifications Authority, where she has worked since 2018. Sue is a specialist in mathematics education, STEM education, assessment, curriculum design and development, as well as teaching, initial teacher education and staff development. Much of her career has been in higher education, working with beginning and practicing teachers and undertaking research and consultancy. She's taught mathematics in secondary schools for several years and has contributed to local and national initiatives to enrich learner experience. Sue was national lead for mathematics in the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority in England, 2007 to 11. She's passionate about all learners having access to a rich curriculum that prepares them for their futures. She's been the senior sponsor for SQA's response to learning for sustainability, which is integral to Scotland's curriculum for excellence and provides a means of ensuring the UN's Sustainable Development Goals can be realised. So I'll hand over to Sue and Donna now, and I'm hoping that Donna, you can show your face and you can share your screen with us.
Yes, good morning. Sue should be, yes, it says Sue has started sharing. There we go. So Sue is going to start off the presentation.
So you're on mute.
I've just discovered it's not possible to unmute when you're sharing your screen.
Okay.
So I'm going to try again. Brilliant. Okay, hopefully you can hear me now and also see the slides. And it is a great pleasure to be with you today for Donna and myself to have an opportunity to share with you what the Scottish Qualifications Authority is up to in relation to learning for sustainability, that, as has already been mentioned, is part of the Curriculum for Excellence. It is a cross-curricular entitlement for all learners, and all teachers in Scotland have the opportunity to learn about learning for sustainability as part of their initial teacher education, and it is also part of teachers' professional standards. Any of you who observed the COP26 event yesterday evening, where Shirley Ann Somerville and Larry Flanagan were representing Scotland, may have been slightly disappointed to see that in a survey, an international survey of countries and their, I suppose, commitment to global citizenship and education around climate change, it said the UK did very badly, but I'm not sure they actually looked at Scotland per se, where some of the things that Mary was talking about and this notion of learning for sustainability is absolutely embedded within the curriculum for all learners 3 to 18 as part of an essential entitlement. And you know, learning for sustainability, this word cloud just gives you a sense of the tremendous areas that it covers. So it's all about sustainable development, global citizenship, you know, awareness of what's happening in terms of all around the world, our climate, our nature, and that it is absolutely embedded there within the curriculum. And quite recently, SQA worked with a wide range of stakeholders, in fact, across Scotland and beyond, who are working in this area. So we had representatives from industry, from higher education, initial teacher education, schools and colleges, to talk about what does learning for sustainability mean, how does it link with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and how can it become part of what happens in the senior phase, largely in schools, but you know, is recognised through achievements and the recognition of learner achievements through our qualifications. So what you can see on the screen is an infographic that we developed through that group of external and internal stakeholders, capturing learning for sustainability as an entitlement for all learners, a whole school approach that enables the school and its wider community to build the values, attitudes, knowledge and skills and confidence needed to develop practices and take decisions that are compatible with a sustainable and equitable society. So it incorporates global citizenship, outdoor learning, and education for sustainable development. And as I say, part of every learner's entitlement. So one of the things we did was look closely at the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how that links with learning for sustainability and what's the potential for us to make explicit links in our qualifications. And so as an organisation, we're committed to identifying opportunities for developing the knowledge, understanding and skills of learning for sustainability within all new courses and those being revised. So for example, we've just developed a new hire in applications of mathematics, and in the course support notes for that course, there are many, many examples of how contexts that can be related to global citizenship, learning for sustainability, sustainable development, etc., can be used to enrich and enhance the learning and teaching of that course. So as I say, we are absolutely, as an organisation, committed to that. We're busy at the moment developing the next generation of higher national qualifications and learning for sustainability as a strand within that. And we are regularly in touch with centres who are asking us, how can we make learning for sustainability more explicit for our learners when they are preparing for your qualifications? And giving them access to information about how they can do that. We're actually currently developing a course at the moment where anyone involved in our qualifications can look to see the kinds of resources they may want to be using to help them embed learning for sustainability in the learning opportunities for people taking our qualifications. So I think now I'm handing over to Donna, who's going to talk a bit about the curriculum. Thank you, Donna.
Yes, thanks, Sue. I want to talk now a wee bit more about curriculum for excellence and then how that translates into a suite of courses at SQA. So our curriculum for excellence places learners at the heart of their education. It centres on 4 fundamental capacities which reflect and recognise the lifelong nature of education and learning. And that is really important to focus on. It's the lifelong nature of learning. So it should extend beyond the school years. So the intention is that all young people will become successful learners, confident individuals, effective contributors, and responsible citizens. And within these 4 fundamental capacities that you can see in the table there, sit a wide range of attributes and capabilities. Now, a lot of these will relate to what Sue had just shown you in the word cloud for learning for sustainability. But these are the attributes that are at the heart of curriculum for excellence. Now, the term curriculum is broader than these 4 capacities. It's broader than the individual curriculum areas and subjects. It also encompasses interdisciplinary learning, the ethos and life of a school or learning centre, and also opportunities for personal achievement. So in effect, it's covering not only what you learn, but also how you learn and how you put your knowledge and experiences into practice, both within a learning environment and in the wider world. Could you have the next slide, please, Sue? So this slide shows a sample of curriculum for excellence statements, which are known as experiences and outcomes, and they relate to learning and to progression through the years. These examples are drawn from sciences and social sciences, and it can be seen that they sit alongside LFS intentions. So you can see there that the right of the child. As a child, I have a right to play outdoors every day and to regularly explore the natural environment. And then moving through to the early stage, the nursery stage, early primary, I observe things in the environment and I'm becoming aware of how they depend on each other. And we can see that they move through designing experiments, thinking about what plants need in order to grow and develop, and then the interactions and energy flow between plants and animals in ecosystems, food chains and webs, and contributing to designing or conserving in the wider world. And then you can see the 3rd stage, we have Greta, who is taking part in the Youth March today. And she represents the statement on, I can understand some of the processes which contribute to climate change and discuss the possible impact of atmospheric change on survival of living things. And beyond that, it is then going much deeper into possible outcomes of climate change, and I can propose strategies to slow or reverse the impact. So you're going from very basic start in observation, right through to active questioning. What is the problem? What is the scale? What is the evidence, which is really, really important? Why is it a problem? How might the problem be tackled by whom? And we need to emphasize that even the smallest individual action can have a positive ripple effect or potentially a negative ripple effect. So obviously this week is COP26 and next week. And the hope is that most learners will have been paying attention to what's going on in the media, They will know about events such as this, and that there are many, many educational resources now available. So these will all be contributing to raising awareness of the implications of climate change, and teachers will be ensuring that this is reflected in their teaching. The learners will also be aware of the attendance of global political leaders and their aides, juxtaposed with these pressure groups and protesters. Unfortunately, the first part of the UN Biodiversity Conference, which was held online in October, didn't achieve the same prominence, but there is a second part to that, which will be face-to-face next April, and hopefully that will achieve greater prominence. And it's important that information from these global level summits help to inform our learners. We'd have the next slide, please, Sue. I just want to move on now to the course that I have responsibility for, so environmental science. And you can see that it covers living environment, earth resources and sustainability, and that they use a problem-solving approach to develop the solutions that we mentioned earlier on in the experiences and outcomes, aiming to prevent or reverse environmental deterioration and to aim for sustainable practices. So the living environment one, which best fits with Mary's talk about natural history, it focuses on practical investigation of ecosystems and biodiversity, the interdependent relationship between species and their environment, and human impacts and influences on biodiversity, which can be both positive and negative. And then the Earth's resources focuses on interactions between the geosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. And again, it considers both the natural and anthropogenic impacts, especially with respect to climate change. And the sustainability component focused on global challenges, such as demand for and access to food, water, and energy. It considers environmental, social, and economic impacts of global food production, improving water quality and energy production, both renewable and non-renewable sources, and waste management. And collectively, these will all impact in some way on nature. But the whole point about sustainability is that you try to find a balance that almost like a compromise, so that you consider that if you give greater weight to nature, then what is the impact of that on people and on the economics. And of course, that's why there is such a range of aids at COP26 this week, because there is no simple solution. They're having to try and find a way through that. And that requires a lot of dialogue and consideration of all perspectives. The environmental science courses are delivered typically by teachers drawn from biology, chemistry, geography, and modern studies. And sometimes these teachers co-deliver. So in this way, young learners are participating in a course that is truly interdisciplinary, and it encourages a wide range of perspectives. Scottish colleges and universities accept the higher environmental science qualifications and entry point for all land or environment-based programmes, and also for the majority of science programmes. And it's really important to continue embedding learning for sustainability in such programmes. And as Sue mentioned, this is currently underway in the next generation higher national courses, and will continue into the development of the next generation national qualifications. So this will ensure that climate change and other sustainability issues are all embedded in the curriculum. I think that's probably way over the 8 minutes that you've allocated us, Erica. So I think it's probably best to stop there. But we'll obviously discuss your questions as they come up which Mary's going to direct us towards. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed to both Sue and to Donna. And as Donna says, we will come back with any discussion points to them later on. So please do put questions in the chat box. So I'm going to invite our next speaker, who is Dr. Christina M. Berry, to show her face on screen if she can. Great. Chrissy was originally born and raised in southeast London, and after attending for a year at the University of Aberystwyth studying equine science, she managed to transfer to Bristol University to finish her undergraduate degree in anatomical science with veterinary anatomy, obtaining a 2:1. After completing her degree, she went on to complete a PGCE in secondary biology education with general science, once again at Bristol University. And upon completion of that, she successfully gained a teaching position at Winterbourne International Academy in Bristol, where she taught for a year before deciding to return to academia. She then completed a master's in veterinary parasitology at Bristol University before finally leaving Bristol to pursue a PhD in veterinary parasitology at Glasgow University. Since its completion, Christina has returned to secondary teaching and has now settled in the hills of Dumfries and Galloway with her husband, 2 boys and various animals, and she continues to indulge her passion for the natural world by sharing it with her boys and the students that she teaches. And a quick note, the childcare for Chrissy fell through, not for Chrissy, for Chrissy's 2-year-old fell through, so he is in the background. So we look forward to hearing the wild noises from your own house. So over to you, Chrissy.
All right, so basically I just wanted to kind of give my opinion as an actual teacher on the ground. So it's kind of quite clear there is a large amount of discord between like kids and the environment. And although we have plenty in place in terms of the curriculum, like, you know, we've got elements of natural history in the biology courses, and of course, as we've just discussed, we've got the environmental science course, but there's a lack of passion, and there is a vast majority of the teenagers that I am teaching have no connection with the environmental element of the world at all. One of the sort of key examples of this is so with S3, I've shown them plenty of times the extinction video done by David Attenborough recently, and you know, teenagers that aren't normally kind of interested in the natural world are watching it and absolutely appalled. But then a few hours later, that passion that's been invoked in them is gone. So for me, I think it's a case that we need to find a way to prolong or embed that passion in those students so that they're actually getting connected with the natural world, and you know, making it fun. Like, you know, you're not going to be interested in things if it becomes something that you have to do. It's something I've noticed since becoming a mother, really. Like, my kids are 6 and 2, and they are really, really interested in the natural world. My eldest son at 4 could identify birds just by their calls. Sorry about this. They could identify birds by their calls, and yet I've got kids in school who are 13, 14 who don't know what certain, if I say what a birch tree is, they have no idea what that is. And I think that's really sad, because when did that passion end? In primary school, they were encouraged to go out and collect leaves and create natural world pictures, and they love it. So when is it that passion for the world around them, when does it stop? And that's kind of the big thing for me in terms of a science teacher, is trying to invoke that passion and have the time and the ability to actually create those experiences for those kids so that it sticks with them. And it's hard. It's something that is very difficult to do, because most teenagers are just more interested in their phones, or interested in their their little bubbles, rather than actually thinking about what's going on around them and actually how their actions are impacting the environment. Don't get me wrong, we have plenty who are passionate about it, but there's such a small number compared to the majority who are completely switched off. And for me, it's a case of thinking, how can we create a situation where those that are switched off are finally switched on? Because once we figure that out, I think, you know, we're not going to be in as much trouble as we currently are. And so that's kind of just like my personal opinions based on my personal observations as a teacher. So that's me. Very quick, very to the point.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chrissy. That's much appreciated. It's really interesting to have a perspective from the classroom. And I should say, it would have been fantastic if we'd been able to get someone who is at school to come and talk to us today. But of course, they are all busy marching through Glasgow at the moment. We made various contacts and nobody was able to come. It is the Youth March today, so be it. But this is not the final discussion that we're going to have on this point, so we will hope to include the voices from the floor, if you like, of the classroom. So the direction of travel of this meeting changes somewhat now. As we are now moving to two speakers from the perspective of the arts and humanities. And I've invited the two of them along to speak because I want to present the idea that attention to the natural world can and should engage learning beyond the sciences. And so our first speaker is Nicole Massiera Cumming, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Strathclyde and the University of Glasgow. And her UK Arts and Humanities Research Council funded research examines the impact of the Reformation on human-animal relationships in 16th and 17th century Scotland. She's a committee member of the Northern Early Modern Network. She has an MA Honours in History and an MLit in Early Modern History from the University of Glasgow, and her master's research examining the belief in therianthropy, that is human shapeshifting into animal form within Scottish witch trials, has recently featured in a special issue of Witchcraft for History Scotland. And she's been on the BBC Scotland Time Travels podcast as well. She's also published on the relationship between meat and power in early modern England in Sloth, a journal of emerging voices in human animal studies, and that came out in 2019. Nicole, thank you for coming. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks for that introduction. Can we see the correct screen just before I get started?
Yes.
Perfect. Make sure everyone can see my slides and not my scribbled down notes. It's always good. So yeah, many thanks to everyone for joining us in the session today. My short presentation essentially will speak to my own research in historical animal studies, but also make a broader case, I hope, for the value of humanities research that includes animals. And it's Erica kind of really nicely introduced there, this argument that this discussion needs to go beyond the sciences if we really are to think about the world in new ways. And yeah, also just a little bit about how this history, I suppose, can tell us about our own past as well. So yeah, why teach the animal then, I suppose? I want to draw attention to the student perspective. I think that's a great place to start when we're talking about education. Montgomery and Caloff have shown in their work that there's a wide uptake and interest on courses about animal history at university level. Analysing animals as historical subjects adds new dimensions and new levels to a wide range of disciplines and engages students in discussions about the real-world applications of history. This ability to make connections appeals to students and underpins the value of humanities research. It also introduces students to the exciting ways that historical research can intersect with other disciplines. This cross-collaboration, and in particular, the relationship between humanities and sciences, is key to thinking about our future in new ways. Approaching the animal in history also helps us to think about our past differently. However, some might argue that the study of history is the study of humanity, maybe making a more distinct distinction between history and natural history. They wouldn't be technically wrong. The history as a discipline was developed in that way, but I don't think that means that there can't be different approaches. As this really lovely quote that I have on the screen here from Howling Keen argues, history with the capital H is itself a way of being in the world. Saying that we as humans have history and other animals do not is one story, one way of making the world, but it isn't the only one. The question we are now concerned with is what happens to history when we recognise that then as now we live in a world with animal others. Traditionally, the majority of historical scholarship would seem to suggest that animals were not part of history, that the natural world was just some sort of backdrop. But as Dorothy Brants has highlighted, this speaks more to the discipline itself than to the reality. After all, how could humans have survived without the food, material, labour and transport that animals have supplied? What would the history of agriculture, of arts and sciences, or even warfare look like without animals? I want to turn my attention here to Scotland, as this is where my own research is based. If we look to Scotland's history and to the 16th and 17th centuries that I look at in particular, we'll see a very different Scotland to the one that we live in today. The majority of the population were pastoral farmers who interacted and thought about animals every day. The majority of the population made their living from the land using traditional methods and communal practices. There were some areas just in the sort of lowland and east coast strip where arable crop farming predominated, but by and large, the nation depended on grazing animals for sustenance and income. At this point, only around 10% of Scots lived in urban areas, and within the growing towns, animals remained a constant presence, living alongside and working with the human population. Yet histories of the period don't really reflect this very well. You can look back at early modern histories and the animals are almost absent. My argument is that if we start to investigate these human and animal relationships for this period, we'll get a better understanding of our own history, help us to fully understand our past, which we need to fully understand our relationship to animals now. I won't take up too much time discussing the inner details of my own research. I could talk about it all day, but I won't. I want to just give a brief overview of what it is that I'm trying to do for my PhD. So my doctoral research looks at the impact of the Scottish Reformation on human and animal relationships in early modern Scotland. And there are, broadly speaking, sort of two parts to this. So the first half of my research thinks about Reformed theology in particular and the ideas about animals that can be traced within the work of theologians. The second half then takes a sort of more practical approach, looking at case studies and analysing the implications of religious change and Protestant understandings of the natural world. Overall, what I want to do is to assess how far the Scottish Reformation altered the way that people thought about and interacted with animals in Scotland. You might say, why does this matter? What does it tell us about Scotland's past? Or you might be thinking, what about the histories of people that still need to be told for this period? Indeed, historical animal studies has been criticised as a discipline for drawing attention away from people whose histories are still to be written. However, as Cochrane and Wells highlight, these studies illuminate not only the animal, but the lives of the people whose worlds were touched by animals, including very often subaltern lives. And this really holds true for Scotland. The history of rural agrarian life is largely unwritten, and this imbalance in favour of a minority urban population skews our understanding of the everyday. By thinking about historical animals, insight can also be gained into the culture of the ordinary folk. Understanding the historical relationship between human and animal can therefore help us to better understand the history of our nation. And equally so, it can help us to understand our current relationship to animals and the natural world. How we view our world is determined by our interactions with other animals that we share it with. And until we understand how this relationship was created and how historical and cultural factors shape our contemporary worldview, then we cannot begin to build a better relationship and work towards a more sustainable future. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll hand back to you, Erica.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Nicole. That's great. Our second speaker in this half of the session is Susan Richardson. Susan is a Wales-based writer. I think you are a Wales-based writer, but you're also a Wales-based writer, performer and educator whose work celebrates and defends animals and wild places, reconnecting our imaginations to them and forging meaningful connections with the more than human world. Her most recent collection of poetry, Words the Turtle Taught Me, themed around endangered marine species, emerged from her residency with the Marine Conservation Society and was shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award. She has many years' experience of running nature writing workshops in schools and universities, on Welsh cliffs and Scottish mountains, and for conservation organisations such as WWF, the Wildlife Trusts and the RSPB. Susan is currently writer in residence with both the British Animal Studies Network here at the University of Strathclyde and the Global Animal Welfare Initiative World Animal Day, and has performed her work on BBC Two, Radios 3 and 4, and at festivals both nationally and internationally. Susan, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much, Erica. Thank you very much for that introduction and also for the invitation to participate in today's discussion. It's a great pleasure to appear alongside so many other speakers and to have the opportunity to talk briefly about my work and also share a couple of poems. So yes, I've been working now as a poet for about 15 years, thinking about using poetry as a means of encouraging people of all ages and backgrounds to engage with the natural world and with various environmental issues through and such issues such as climate change, biodiversity loss, species level extinction, marine plastics and the plight of our oceans. And so really thinking about how poetry can be used as a tool for encouraging participants to engage with those issues. And not just doing it through my own writing and performing, but also through running workshops in a range of different contexts, from primary schools, secondary schools, universities, and then broader community settings. And over this period, I think I've come to develop a really passionate belief in poetry's ability to inspire shifts in perception and I think generate new patterns of thought and experience. And I think this is probably true of all of the arts, in fact. I think poetry aims, of course, to engage the intellect, but it also aims to engage the heart. And if people can develop an emotional connection with a particular creature or with a particular issue, I think that connection is much more likely to be strong and enduring. So I'll talk a little bit about my residency with the Marine Conservation Society. It's the longest project of this kind that I've been involved with. I was brought in during their 30th anniversary year, a few years ago now, to be writer in residence with the organisation. And I was commissioned to write 30 new poems in celebration and defence of 30 threatened species, all of whom appear on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, and all of whom actually are resident in or visitors to UK waters. And I think this project, more than any that I've been involved with, really encapsulates that Caroline Lucas quote that Erica used in the publicity for this event. We won't protect what we don't love, and we won't love what we don't know. And I think the whole thrust of my involvement with this project was really encouraging people to get to know some of these 30 threatened species, and from that, hopefully develop an affection and love for them, and from that, want to protect them. I discovered very early on that the creatures most of them were not iconic, charismatic creatures, that those poster boys that we often see associated with environmental campaigns, such as polar bears and pandas. We did have a couple of iconic, charismatic marine mammals, such as the bottlenose dolphin, and a very popular, much-loved seabird like the Atlantic puffin to work with. But most of the overwhelming majority of these creatures were actually quite unknown, I think, unseen, certainly, deep sea dwellers. I think there was one creature, the frilled shark, for example, that has only been seen alive on 2 occasions. It's been seen dead, sadly, on rather more occasions than that, but only alive, I think, on 2 occasions. So I had 9 different shark poems to write. And also, in addition to writing these 30 threatened species poems and sharing the work and performing the work, I was also, of course, running workshops to encourage people to engage with the creatures too. Very early on in the project, it became apparent that there was quite a divide between, it was almost an age divide, I think. Those at school-age people were really, really keen to engage with sharks and celebrate their apparent strangeness or their difference from, or their non-human animal otherness. Whereas adult participants tended to be a lot less inclined to do so. Initially, I would have comments such as, I can't really get excited about fish, and I don't really want to write about sharks. I find them a bit sinister and scary. So I think my main aim in those workshop contexts was really to develop ways of making these creatures more accessible. And one of the techniques that I developed, I think, and this was true of my own writing as well, was to try and find a point of connection between the human and the non-human, the human animal and the non-human animal. So to try to find some sense of commonality somewhere, if it was at all possible. And one example that I'd like to share with you, one poem in fact, is about the poor beagle shark. This is one of the 9 shark species that I had to somehow come up with a poem about, and it's been grossly overhunted for its fins, its flesh, and its liver oil over the years. So numbers are certainly not as healthy as they should be and could be. And I think that's the first thing that everyone, if anyone's doing research on the poor beagle shark, it's certainly their threatened status and what they're suffering that is most apparent to us. But when I did a little bit more delving, I was lucky enough to discover that the poor beagle shark actually displays a characteristic that we often as humans display, that our companion animals display, and in fact the young of many mammals also show. And that's the poor beagle shark is the only shark species that's actually been shown to display a play tendency. So I decided that in the workshops I would try and focus on that aspect, and in my own poem, that's what I wanted to focus on too. So I'll end my brief talk by just sharing my poor beagle shark poem. As I said, the theme is very much about play, but I also found that in the process of writing it, language, the actual style and form of the poem became quite playful too. So language misbehaves, nouns don't always act as nouns, verbs don't always behave as verbs, adjectives behave very badly too. And this is in the voice of the poor beagle shark. Love being on the cusp of tooth, love quick swim and squidding, love egging little finniness, 1,000 egging. Love best when frondling kelp, the over-under, over-roll, and oh, the gilly tingle, not just skin ridding, not just snail fall, but wrap and tangle, tag and tug, all feely with it. Love sillying the timbers, love snouting the floaters till they pop. Better than sex scar, better than flits of whipping sleep, and better than their one-some funning, the rippy throat, the long, long strung, then gut gash when they fin we out in thrash of unsea above. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Susan. I should just interrupt by saying I taught that poem yesterday or Wednesday with a group of students. We had a special COP26 English session and they loved it and we loved it and we had a lovely time imagining out from it. So thank you. Our final speaker needs little introduction for those of us who live in Scotland. Ross Greer is Scottish Greens MSP for the West Scotland region, where he sits on 2 key committees, the Education, Children and Young People Committee and the Finance and Public Administration Committee. He's the Scottish Greens Education, Finance and External Affairs spokesperson, and Ross previously served as a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament and worked for Yes Scotland in the run-up to the 2014 referendum. When he was first elected in 2016, he was the youngest ever MSP, and anyone who follows Ross on Twitter will know just how active he is in relation to issues of youth engagement and education and everything else. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome him here today when I imagine he's barely slept for quite a long time and I know he has to rush off to another meeting straight away after this. So welcome, Ross. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me, Erica. On exactly that theme of how enthusiastic I get for youth engagement around the climate and the environment. The reason that I was a little bit late to, or not late to the start of this meeting, but the reason I did start this meeting on my phone and didn't have my camera on is because I was on a bus coming back from a very last minute visit to a school in my region in Erskine Park Mains High School for their COP26 day. So a friend of mine's a modern studies teacher there called in a favour to get me along this morning, and it was incredibly energizing for those of us who are environmental and climate campaigners in whatever field. It can be easy to be demoralized at the moment. We've not exactly been winning, and I get my hope and all the energy that I'm able to then put into this campaign from the young people that I speak to. I was once the youngest MSP. It feels like I'm struggling to hold on to a claim to youth these days, or certainly having just spoke to a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds, I feel absolutely ancient at the age of 27. But it set me up, I think, really well for thinking about this discussion and how we move this agenda forward, because there's two parallel campaigns going on here, and one is the Teach the Future campaign, which I'm sure a lot of folk here will be familiar with. So that's a youth-led campaign to integrate teaching about the climate emergency and how we tackle it, both what it will mean, what caused it, but also how we tackle it, to integrate that across our curriculum. There's Teach the Future campaigns across all the jurisdictions of the UK. And then there is this separate, but I think very much related and complementary campaign to introduce a distinct natural history qualification. And I'll come back to the point of what I think the relationship between the two of those is at the moment. But in the first instance, I think the political initiative to achieve both of those is very much coming from the same places, and the reception to both is pretty similar. Don and Sue explained the existing provisions in the Curriculum for Excellence that we've got here in Scotland in relation to issues of learning for sustainability. I think it's worth saying that this is an area that we already do really quite well on. We shouldn't be complacent. We have a lot more that we need to do. But the OECD report into the Curriculum for Excellence, the one that was published in June, it made a range of criticisms and suggestions for change. But the one thing that the OECD have quite consistently praised Scotland on is how well we do when it comes to issues around global citizenship. Young people in Scotland, as a result of not just our education system, but primarily as a result of our education system, are really aware of the issues that the wider world faces. So global citizenship is one of our objectives through Curriculum for Excellence, is one that we are succeeding on. And I think as much as the focus that we often make around literacy, numeracy, etc., is obviously incredibly important, I think we probably, in a lot of the national discussions that we have about Scottish education, are missing the fact that in areas like this, global citizenship education, media literacy is another one that our young people do very well on. We should be really proud of that, and we should be really proud of the progress that we've made, because I think these are absolutely integral skills to a successful adult life in the 21st century. I mean, we only need to look at the amount of fake news that there is, deliberate misinformation that there is around issues related to the climate and the environment, to see the value of having young people who know how to distinguish between fact and fiction on these areas. But there is inconsistency in how this is delivered. That, you know, I've talked up this as being an area the OECD praises on. That doesn't mean that across every school in Scotland and every classroom, this is being done to the level that we want it to. And that's partly as a result of how our curriculum is structured. And our curriculum is structured in a way to try and give as much flexibility to teachers and to schools as possible, which is absolutely right. But there is a need for a minimum level of consistency on these issues. And I think that while a new qualification wouldn't be a singular solution to this, because apart from anything else, not every young person is going to take this qualification, I think it does play a really important part in it. And one of the reasons that I think that a distinct qualification is important is the range of other areas that I've just talked about around global citizenship, media literacy, etc. A lot of these fall into, or some of them, generally fall into the area of the curriculum, issues related to health and well-being, for example, that isn't assessed. And what we found when I was on, or still am on, Parliament's Education Committee, but in the last session of Parliament, we did an inquiry into how personal and social education is delivered in Scottish schools. Now that could cover absolutely everything from what we would call citizenship education that relates to some of these issues, but it also includes things like sex and relationships, mental health, drugs and alcohol, etc. And it was the area that by far was delivered the most inconsistently across Scottish schools, because it doesn't have parity of esteem with assessed subjects. Ultimately, while we have not just the qualification system we've got, because it's not just that system, while we have the culture that we have here in Scotland, and it's how unique to our country, while we have a culture that places such high importance, not just on education, but specifically on the qualifications that you leave school with, if you do not have a qualification in an area like natural history, if you're expecting to just try, for example, and integrate it across the curriculum, you may find that it falls through the cracks because it's not given parity of esteem with your assessed subjects, with your maths, English, geography, history, etc. So I think there's a really important point here around parity of esteem for natural history. If we want it to have that parity of esteem in our schools, if we want local authorities, if we want parents to place importance on it, then having a qualification that young people can actually leave school with is really important. I say all that still as an absolute supporter of what Teach the Future are trying to do for a consistent embedding of climate education across the curriculum. I think that point around parity of esteem is one that we really need to bear in mind here. The wider context for this discussion is one of quite significant amounts of reform in Scottish education over the next couple of years. So the two most obvious are our qualifications authority and our qualification system are going to change. In the next few years, we're going to see we've got the two current bodies at the moment, the SQA and Education Scotland, so one responsible for the curriculum and the inspectorate, and the SQA responsible for qualifications assessments. We're going to have the inspectorate will be separated out. That's great, but not relevant to this discussion. What we're going to have is a new body responsible for both the curriculum and the qualification system to get that better alignment between the two, which I think will be positive in respect to the issues that I've just raised around parity of esteem. And once we have that new agency that's got the alignment, better alignment between qualifications and the curriculum, at that point, it may well be much easier to make an argument around something like this. But I don't actually think we can wait, or I certainly don't want to wait, knowing that it's going to take a couple of years to deliver that change, that new agency. But even once that's been delivered, you've still then got a couple of years of it bedding in. That's just me talking about the organisational change. We're also about to embark on a process of reform around the qualification system itself. So asking these questions around, does a system of high stakes end of term exams really measure what we want it to? Do we need to start looking more at systems of continuous assessment, etc.? So I mention all this to give context to the fact that there's a huge amount of wider change going on in the Scottish education system. That doesn't mean, as I said, that we should wait until all that change has happened, embedded in, and then say, right, well, this is the moment for this qualification to be brought in. Because our experience from the last decade with Curriculum for Excellence is it never really beds in. You would be left waiting for quite a while if you waited until things had settled down. So that brings me back to the point I started off with, of what I believe that the relationship between the case for natural history qualification and the wider embedding of climate and sustainability education across the curriculum actually is. Both of these absolutely fit with the Scottish Government's wider agenda. And I should say, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Scottish Government. My party are now a party of government, but I'm not a minister in the government, so I have the luxury of being able to speak as I wish, which is nice. But I don't see, speaking personally, if we're trying to get the political green light to move ahead with this, I think it is unlikely that we would get a green light to go ahead with one but not the other, because there's a risk of that just upsetting groups of people unnecessarily. These are interrelated. I don't think that's a bad thing. If the government was not into this wider agenda, then it may well be a problem, because you're asking for quite a big set of changes, a new qualification and the wider embedding. If you had a government who was inherently hostile or unenthusiastic about these issues, asking for something that big would probably be quite a barrier to success. I think it's fair to say we're pushing at an open door here with the Scottish Government on the principle of this. They're not going to disagree with the arguments in principle. The barriers here are going to be primarily around capacity and the fact that this is happening at the same time as this wider case for reform. But one thing that Teach the Future, I think, can teach us as the slightly older people who are having these discussions around the qualification is that when you've got young people coming face to face with politicians, with government ministers and lobbying, governments don't want to be, or certainly the Scottish Government does not want to be seen to be rejecting the demands of young people. So for those of us who are a few years past the point where we could reasonably say we're a young person, getting them on board, getting school pupils themselves to join us in making this case, I think that is really, really important for us pushing this agenda forward, actually having young people themselves lobby their MSPs, but lobbying the government directly, lobbying the Education Secretary directly on this, because if that is on their radar, because it's coming in their inbox, whether it's from individual constituents or in the case of government ministers from any young person across the country, that then makes it much easier for those of us in Parliament, for example, on the Education Committee, if we try to push for the committee to do a little bit of work to look into this, and then if that was the case, it would produce a report or a letter for the Cabinet Secretary. I think it would prepare the ground. It would make it much more likely that any work that's done in Parliament gets a positive response from government if this is already on the radar of the government. So that's my theory of change around this, how we can get from where we are now to where we want to be, which is actually having this qualification rolled out in schools. I'll finish at that point. The one thing that I would mention just as an anecdote is I was talking about this meeting at Parkmains High School when I was in the staff room this morning just before the school day started, and the enthusiasm from the modern studies and geography teachers there for it was really incredible. There were folk in the room who weren't part of the conversation we were having, but turned around at that point when they heard mention of this, because there's a real desire from teachers in Scotland, from a huge number of teachers, to be really driving forward this agenda. So again, that brings up the question of if we're getting young people lobbying, getting the teachers and their unions involved and enthusiastic about this as well, I think is going to be really important to us for taking those next steps. I will round off at that point and just give my apologies now in case I have to drop out before the Q&A session is finished, because as Erica mentioned, I've got another couple of things on this afternoon. As you can imagine, I can actually hear the climate strike about to come past me here in Glasgow.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ross, and thanks for your time when you must be rushed off your feet. We do have some time left for the Q&A as hoped. So I'm going to open that, and I've asked, as I said, Rebecca Jones to curate the comments in the question that have gone in the chat box. So please keep asking your questions in that chat box. It's only fair, Rebecca is, I don't know if you're going to show your face or be a disembodied voice, Rebecca, but I'm going to introduce you. Rebecca is also working on a PhD in English, this time at the University of Strathclyde. Her thesis uses theoretical work from ecofeminist critical animal studies to analyse the representation of masculinity, meat and species in speculative fiction since Frankenstein. She's the editor-in-chief of the Media, Communication and Cultural Studies Association journal Networking Knowledge, and has published on subjects including feminist animal rights activism online, masculinity and the male-authored vegan cookbooks, and the history of the mockery of male vegetarianism. And she's also the coordinator of Glasgow Women's Library's book group. And I'm extremely grateful for her help here today. So Rebecca, do you want to start us off with a comment, a point that's come up in the chat, or do you have a question yourself? Oh, you're there.
I am here. Yes, we haven't any questions in the chat so far. So if anybody does want to ask a question, please do. One thing that's actually emerged in the chat is this distinction between sustainability and natural history. Now, I know a few of our speakers have sort of touched upon that in what they were saying, but it may be productive for everybody to comment on that, and to think about, you know, the role that is playing in this discussion. I know that Tina has commented that about the popularity of forest schools as a kind of a training for small numbers of school staff. And Tina says forest schools are not natural history education, but are often treated as if they were. So perhaps somebody would like to come in on that.
Well, can I suggest, I mean, Mary, can I ask you why you chose that title? And then Donna and Sue and any of the other speakers who want to come in, and Chrissy as well, of course, maybe offer counter reasons why you think another word would be better, how you understand that word. So Mary, do you want to kick off with that?
Yes, absolutely. It's something that we thought about quite a lot, and the people said, oh, natural history, it's such an old-fashioned term and it won't appeal. But I really don't agree. I think that we have the BBC Natural History Unit, we have the Natural History Museum, and everybody knows what that means. It's about animals and plants, and it's about creatures, and it's about how they live and what they are. And I think you just get it if you say natural history. So you wouldn't say, call the Natural History Museum the Sustainability Museum, because that's something different. But I do think out there in the sort of popular world, these terms, environment, sustainability, nature, natural history, all become amalgamated into this mushy term. And I think that has problems for me, because unless you know what you're talking about, unless you know what that tree is and what it needs, and, you know, to plant it, what it needs, what it does, what its function is, and you just think of it as a tree, then we'll start making the wrong decisions about where to plant it, how many to plant, what to plant, where. You've got to have the basics. It's like trying to solve, if we're trying to solve these very complex environmental issues, which we have, we've got to have the building blocks upon which to make the right decisions. It's a bit like saying, I want to be a master chef, but I'm not quite sure what an egg is. You know, you've got to know the basics to build up, to make those decisions. So I think natural history, think Darwin, think Attenborough, think Natural History Museum, think Natural History Unit. That's what natural history is. It's a tremendous tradition which we need to reinvigorate and be really proud of again, because Britain and Ireland are absolutely some of the best studied countries in the world for natural history. We have a tremendous history of leading lights in natural history, and we want to carry on that tradition as well.
Sue, do you want to come back at all on any thoughts? I mean, you've got an environmental science qualification, as you talked about. I mean, how do you figure that is different, or do you think it's covering similar ground?
I mean, I do appreciate where Mary is coming from, and England is a very different, you know, different scale to Scotland. You know, the cohort each year is about 700,000. In Scotland, it's about 50,000. So one of the dangers of saying, well, let's just make another qualification is, it may be a fantastic qualification, but whether or not it will be taken up and anybody will be able to teach it is a really big issue. But you know, we love environmental science, as you probably picked up. It's truly interdisciplinary, and actually it does go down to the detail of, you know, how do these different trees, you know, differ? What sorts of environments do they need to be in, and so on. That's all very much within actually environmental science. So some of the things Mary was saying, you know, that is absolutely in there. But the uptake is tiny. And one of the things that Ross was talking about in terms of the sorts of qualifications that learners do in Scotland, one of the things that drives it is the way that Scottish government hold schools to account through what are called insight points. And those insight points do favour the graded national courses, and you know, and that tend to be, I suppose, relatively traditional. And so one of the big challenges is what's, you know, as we move to the review of what's happening in Scotland and the kind of ways in which we recognise learner achievement, is the big questions that Ros was setting out. You know, what is our education system for? what do we actually value, and how do we ensure that the things that we value are the things that actually young people have the opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities in. So I do think that in Scotland, with learning for sustainability being absolutely embedded within the curriculum, opportunities for natural history are there. And I hope that we will be able to strengthen that as we move into, as I say, the reform that's coming up. But I'm not certain that having another qualification that may, as I say, have very little uptake, very little opportunity for people to upskill to teach it, would be the way to go. It's very difficult for us in SQA to make a case for a new course. So I mentioned the new hire in applications of mathematics. That took, it's just starting this year. It took 3 years to develop. You know, developing a new graded national course takes a long time in Scotland, and probably for any other awarding organisation. And one of the things you have to do is make a business case to say there are people who want this course. So in Scotland, we do have some courses where the government say, this is so important, we want this course. So for example, our Gaelic qualifications, they have very, very tiny uptake, but because of the languages strategy of the Scottish government, they are there and they have to be there. But BSL is British Sign Language is a language that's adopted, one of Scotland's languages, but we don't have national qualifications in it. We have some qualifications, they're awards, tiny uptake, but they're not graded national courses like the Gaelic or whatever. For me, natural history needs to be absolutely something part of every learner's education. So it needs to be embedded in the curriculum. And having a qualification isn't necessarily going to help to ensure that happens.
I think that raises an interesting question that's come up a lot, and you talked about the interdisciplinary nature of the environmental science. So I want to bring in kind of Susan and Nicole here, because one of the things that I think is really interesting, of course I would, because this is what I am interested in myself in my research, is that kind of what happens to the established subjects like literary studies, creative writing, history, and so on, when you recognize that animals might have a presence of whatever nature, whether it's to get you to think creatively, whether it's to revise our understanding of the historical stories. Can you see how the kinds of things you're doing, I know Susan, you talked about this, could embed themselves in the education system to fully support either the sustained kind of interest across the board that Sue is talking about, but also to perhaps be part of a natural history qualification?
Yes, I mean, I would ideally want both. I would love there to be a separate qualification, because I think that feels to me to be very essential, but I would also want to try and embed it into as many other disciplines as possible. And certainly when I go into schools, I might be working alongside a history teacher or a geography teacher or a literature or an English teacher, and trying to embed, show ways in which relationships with animals, environmental issues, climate change, etc., can actually be embedded in all of the disciplines. But I don't think that should be at the expense of developing a separate qualification as well. I think everything is needed. Come at it from as many different angles as possible.
Nicole, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just what underpinned my thoughts when I was forming my presentation for today is the need, I think, when we're talking about these issues of climate and how we start to think about these questions for the future, often just comes down to this often a divide, isn't it, between science and humanities that still just seems to be maintained and upheld to some degree. And I think that that's really damaging. I think that's a shame. I think that interdisciplinarity needs to take in all disciplines. It's all well and good for social sciences and sciences to cross over as they so often do, but how can we do this with more established subjects? As I said, why do we think about the natural world in the way that we do? It's because of historical factors, because of the culture of a nation, because of their religion, perhaps. And I think that is something that students are interested in. They want to know why we see the world the way we see it, and they want to think about how we get to this point and also how we move forward. And I think that they're just really connected. How exactly that would perhaps be practically implemented. I mean, I totally agree with Susan as well. I do think that there's tremendous value in having a natural history module, but I suppose beyond that, how can we think about these things, and how can they be taught through history as well? You know, it doesn't just need to be the study of people. Those people lived in a world. They lived alongside animals, plants, trees, and so often, I suppose, young people today, they might, I think as Mary so beautifully put it at the start, like, how do you care about something if you don't even know its name, you know, if you don't know what a butterfly is? But equally, so how do you know that things have not always been exactly how they are if you're not taught that?
I'm aware, Sue, you've got your hand up, as has Donna. Can I just come in and invite Chrissy if you want to kind of respond at all here?
Yeah, actually, I mean, this is it. Coming from someone who's on the ground with these teenagers, I mean, firstly, I agree with Mary. I think the term like natural history, it kind of almost holds a bit of magic to it, because it's not really a term that we kind of use very much in Scottish education at the moment. Sustainability we use plenty of times, and they almost become numb to it. You know, it's one of those words that we throw around a lot and they tend to switch off. But natural history, you know, you automatically think, oh, Darwin and like, you know, Attenborough, and they tend to get a little bit more excited because it's a bit more out of the box from what they're normally doing. Now, I do agree with what they're saying in terms of implementation and taking up of the course. Like, it is difficult to get kids to pick courses. I mean, like, at my school, we've only just started doing the environmental science course, and the uptake wasn't huge. But then there's also the flip side of, do we have enough teachers to be able to bring those courses in? So, I mean, there's plenty of fantastic looking National 5 and higher courses that are available on the curriculum at the moment. But if we don't have the teachers available in terms of timetabling to teach them, then the school won't agree to take them up. Now, I also agree with the fact that we need everything. You know, we need like a whole range of approaches to this. We need it embedded more. It needs to be a lot more obvious than it is now. I mean, the amazing thing with the curriculum for excellence is the fact that, you know, you've got such a wide scope of different things that you can cover in schools. I'm talking from a science department point of view. There's a lot of different things that we can cover, but at the same time, there needs to be something a bit more kind of like obvious and in your face. There's also like a huge scope for cross-curricular activities. So for example, I'm currently, as a biology teacher in the science department, liaising with the art department in my school to actually create a school-wide event where we are trying to get art and biology sort of matched up, where the kids are going to be particularly S3, going to be looking at the beauty of nature and then projecting that into fashion and the art of biology. And like we were, unfortunately I broke my ankle, so it hasn't gone ahead as we had hoped so far, but we were hoping to do like a big kind of like junkature kind of focus, and then have like a big fashion show at the end, just to kind of bring the fact that, yes, you know, you have science, but there's also beauty in that. There's a lot of crossover in a lot of the different like sort of subjects that we have, but just trying to sort of invoke that passion and get students to start thinking about things outside of the normal boxes that we keep putting them in, if that makes sense. And I think that is something that we need to think about in terms of this whole like natural history sort of approach. We need more. It needs more. There's stuff in place at the moment, but it's not enough. If it was enough, we wouldn't be having the problems we're having now. So yeah, I think every approach we can possibly take is a good thing.
Thanks, Chrissy. Donna, do you want to come in? I'm very aware we're running over at this point. So Donna, can I ask you a quick response, and then I'll come back to you, Rebecca, to just take us through what's left. I'm afraid that's going to be it. But Donna, very quick response, please. Sorry. I
just really want to say that I agree with everything that's been said today, and I've already discussed with Sue recently, you know, how I think a qualification in natural history would complement environmental science. They would sit together really nicely together rather than one or the other. But I also understand what Sue was talking about there, about you have to get schools to take it up. We have to try and get the parity that Ross was talking about for schools themselves to see that it's just as important as biology or chemistry or physics or any other subject. That then brings its own problems in that there's only a finite number of school hours. And, you know, what are the priorities for government? So as was said, you know, we will be undergoing a review, and I would like to see more natural history and more emphasis on environmental science as well. But at what expense? Something has to give. And this is a big problem that government has, because they have to listen to all perspectives, all the stakeholders, and other subjects may feel they have as much importance as what's going on in the natural world. So I was just really trying to capture that I agree with what's been said.
Thank you, Donna. Rebecca, do you want to just take us through anything that's come up on that chat?
Sure. Niall, I know Niall's had to leave, but Niall mentioned this kind of the problems around sustainability as a kind of I guess as a buzzword, and how it has been adopted as almost a kind of greenwashing thing, and that the action on this needs to be kind of, I suppose, I'm reading into what Niall has said here, but action on this needs to be meaningful and needs to be considered and needs to have, you know, real value, rather than being this kind of gesturing, this kind of signalling thing. And I think Mary has added that it's a political term, and I think that's something we'd all recognise, that it's a very politicised term that some people react to in quite pronounced ways. But I think that's everything. I don't think there's anything else. Anybody else has asked to have anything raised. So thanks very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I've got loads of questions, but time is running out. I am going to run to George Square to join the children, the young people's rally there, but we are going to finish on an upbeat note with a final poem from Susan. Just to finish us off, Susan, do you want to hit the final poem?
Thank you, Erica. Thanks so much to everyone for listening. I'd like to share another shark poem, actually. And this poem is about the thresher shark, which sadly, vulnerable to the all too familiar threats of marine debris and unsustainable fishing practices, bottom trawling, unmanaged longline and gillnet fishing. It's full of metaphors of the thresher shark's biology and behaviour, and it also references so many anti-marine debris initiatives that have been springing up around the world in recent years. It's a bit of a call to arms. I think it's very easy to get really disillusioned, very overwhelmed by such statistics that, you know, soon the oceans are going to be containing more plastic than fish. So this poem is really, I suppose, reacting to that and trying to encourage everyone to take personal responsibility and celebrate some of the anti-marine plastics initiatives that are taking place around the world as well. So this is Pledge. Let us craft carpets from marine debris. Let us slough off our styrofoam greed for bowls of thin soup, using gritty insistence instead of microbeads. Let us fix a filter to our washing machines to prevent our nanofibers reaching the sea and begetting synthetic herring and anchovy. Let us unlay the cables that derange your electroreceptors. Let us fill gillnets with nothing but the will to steeply increase your numbers. Let us weep no more mermaids' tears. Let us leap clear of our pelagic fear that it's too late to change. Let us mount a campaign to unpurse the sane. Let us generate and maintain a higher internal purpose than that of our surrounds. Let us herd our diurnal urge for PVC into a shoal and stun it with one thrash of our faith in your recovery. Let us prey only on apathy.
Thank you very much. That's a fantastic way of ending today. Thank you to all the speakers. I know people have had to rush off because we're all very busy. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to questions and for just coming along today. This conversation is just beginning, and I hope that with Ross, I might be able to convene another meeting for us all to think about this issue again, perhaps face-to-face next time. But until that time, thank you again, everybody. Please stay safe. And if you're a tail ender, you'll know what I'm about to say here. And it's real. Go well, everybody.